That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah tucked Emily into bed. The day's events still lingered heavily in her mind, but she forced a smile for her daughter's sake. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. Emily looked up at her with big, trusting eyes. "Mommy, why was that lady so mad at us?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with confusion. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain something even she didn't fully understand. She wanted to shield Emily from the harshness of the world, to let her believe that people were always kind and fair. But deep down, Sarah knew that wasn't reality. Still, she chose her words carefully. "Sometimes, people don't know how to be nice when things don't go exactly the way they want them to," she said gently. "But it's not your fault, okay? You didn't do anything wrong." Emily nodded slowly, though her expression remained thoughtful. Satisfied that her daughter felt safe enough to drift off to sleep, Sarah kissed her goodnight and turned off the light. As she closed Emily's bedroom door behind her, the weight of the afternoon hit her like a wave. Her hands trembled slightly as she leaned against the wall, replaying Karen's sharp words and dismissive gestures in her mind. For most parents, dealing with someone like Karen might have ended there, with frustration, maybe even tears, but ultimately resignation. After all, what could one person do against someone so determined to wield power over others? But Sarah wasn't like most parents. Beneath her calm demeanor was a woman trained to analyze situations, identify patterns, and strategize solutions. And while Karen had no idea who she was dealing with, Sarah already had wheels turning in her head. She walked into the living room and sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the muted television screen. Her thoughts raced as she considered her options. On one hand, she could let the incident slide, chalk it up to Karen being difficult, and focus on protecting Emily from further encounters. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this wasn't an isolated case. If Karen treated her and Emily this way, who else had she targeted? What if there were others, families struggling financially, elderly neighbors, or people with disabilities who had been subjected to similar treatment? Sarah sat up straighter, her resolve strengthening. She decided then and there that she wouldn't let fear or exhaustion stop her from standing up, not just for herself and Emily, but for everyone in the neighborhood who deserved respect and fairness. But she also knew that acting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. If she wanted to make a difference, she needed to approach this situation with the same precision and professionalism she brought to her job. The first step was gathering information. Sarah grabbed a notebook from the kitchen counter and began jotting down notes about the encounter with Karen. She wrote down the date, time, location, and every detail she could remember. The tone of Karen's voice, her body language, the exact words she used. It was a habit drilled into her during her years as a threat analyst. Document everything. Patterns often emerged when you looked closely enough, and Sarah intended to find out whether Karen's behavior followed any predictable trends. Over the next few days, Sarah kept a close eye on Karen's interactions with other neighbors. She observed subtle things. How Karen glared at a teenager skateboarding too close to her mailbox, how she scolded an older man for parking his car slightly over the curb, and how she loudly complained about holiday decorations staying up past January 15th. Each observation added another layer to the picture Sarah was piecing together. But more importantly, she started talking to her neighbors. At first, Sarah approached these conversations casually, making small talk while walking Emily to school or chatting over the fence. She'd mentioned the HOA rules in passing, asking if anyone else found them challenging to follow. Slowly, people opened up. One neighbor confessed that Karen had once sent him a formal warning letter because his dog barked too much. Another revealed that Karen had publicly shamed her at an HOA meeting for planting flowers outside her window box without prior approval. A young couple admitted they'd received a fine for leaving their trash cans out overnight, a rule they hadn't known existed until Karen pointed it out. Each story confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Karen's behavior wasn't random, it was calculated. She thrived on control, using the HOA's strict guidelines as a tool to intimidate and dominate those around her. And while some neighbors shrugged it off as part of living in a regulated community, others expressed frustration and helplessness. No one wanted to cross Karen, fearing retaliation or public humiliation. As Sarah collected these stories, she noticed something else, a growing sense of solidarity among her neighbors. Many of them had suffered in silence, assuming they were alone in their grievances. But hearing that others shared their frustrations made them feel less isolated. Sarah realized she had tapped into something powerful: unity. If she could bring enough people together, they might stand a chance against Karen's reign of terror. With this newfound insight, Sarah began crafting a plan. She knew confronting Karen directly wouldn't work, not yet anyway. Instead, she focused on building alliances and documenting evidence. Every conversation, every complaint, every instance of Karen's bullying behavior was recorded in her notebook. She even started taking discrete photos of incidents, like the time Karen argued with a landscaper over the placement of a tree branch. These details would become crucial later, but for now, Sarah kept them tucked away, waiting for the right moment to act. Despite her determination, Sarah occasionally felt overwhelmed. Balancing her demanding job, caring for Emily, and navigating the complexities of neighborhood politics was exhausting. There were nights when she questioned whether it was worth it, whether she should simply move on and avoid further conflict. But then she'd look at Emily, asleep in her bed, and remember the hurt in her daughter also expression when Karen slammed the door in their faces. That memory fueled her resolve. She couldn't let anyone treat her child, or anyone else's family, that way ever again. By the end of the week, Sarah had transformed from a quiet, reserved neighbor into someone quietly orchestrating change. She wasn't seeking revenge or personal glory. She simply wanted justice. And armed with her analytical skills, unwavering patience, and a growing network of allies, she was confident she could achieve it. All she needed was time, and the perfect opportunity to strike back. In a quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood where manicured lawns and white picket fences were the norm, Sarah Thompson lived with her 8-year-old daughter, Emily. Emily was a bright, cheerful child who loved drawing pictures of animals and watching cartoons. However, life wasn't always easy for her because she had cerebral palsy, which made it hard for her to walk or move around without help. Emily used a wheelchair to get around, but that never stopped her from smiling or enjoying the little things in life. Sarah, on the other hand, was a single mom who worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter while balancing her demanding job as a threat analyst for the Department of Homeland Security. Though her work often involved dealing with high-stakes situations, Sarah's priority was always Emily. The neighborhood they lived in was governed by a strict homeowners association, HOA, known for its rigid rules about everything from lawn length to parking restrictions. While most residents followed these guidelines without much fuss, there was one person everyone dreaded crossing paths with: Karen. Karen was infamous in the community, not just for her love of enforcing HOA rules, but also for her sharp tongue and quick temper. She served on the HOA board and took immense pride in making sure every rule was followed to the letter. Whether it was sending warning letters to homeowners whose grass was half an inch too long, or confronting neighbors over misplaced garbage bins, Karen made sure no one forgot her presence. One sunny afternoon, Sarah decided to take Emily out for some fresh air. They hadn't been outside much lately due to Emily's recent doctor appointments, so both mother and daughter were excited to spend time together. Their destination was simple: the home of a kind neighbor who lived just a few houses down. The neighbor had invited them over earlier in the week, and Emily couldn't wait to show off her latest artwork. As Sarah helped Emily navigate their front steps, carefully lifting her wheelchair onto the sidewalk, they noticed Karen standing near her driveway. Karen was busy inspecting someone else's garden when she glanced up and spotted Sarah and Emily. At first, Karen didn't say anything. She simply stared at them with an expression that seemed equal parts irritation and judgment. But then, as Sarah pushed Emily's wheelchair closer to the sidewalk leading toward the neighbor's house, Karen stepped forward. Her voice cut through the peaceful afternoon like a knife. "Excuse me," she called out loudly enough for several nearby neighbors to hear. Startled, Sarah turned to face her. Karen pointed accusingly at the edge of Sarah's property line. "You're blocking access to the sidewalk," she snapped. "This is unacceptable." Sarah blinked in confusion. Blocking access? She looked around and realized what Karen meant. The wheels of Emily's chair had briefly brushed against the grass bordering the sidewalk. It was such a minor thing, barely noticeable, yet Karen acted as though Sarah had committed a major crime. Trying to stay calm, Sarah explained. "I'm sorry if we disturbed anything. We'll be more careful." But Karen wasn't satisfied. Instead, her tone grew even harsher. "More careful? You should know better than to let this happen in the first place," she said, gesturing dramatically at Emily's wheelchair. Emily, sensing the tension, gripped the armrests of her chair tightly. Her smile faded, replaced by wide eyes filled with worry. Seeing her daughter upset, Sarah felt her own frustration rising. Still, she tried to keep her voice steady. "Look, I understand your concern, but my daughter needs to use the sidewalk safely. We're just trying to visit our neighbor." Karen crossed her arms and rolled her eyes. "Well, maybe you should think twice before bringing all of this," she waved vaguely at Emily's wheelchair, "onto public property. People have standards here." The words stung, especially coming in front of strangers who were now watching the scene unfold. Sarah clenched her jaw, resisting the urge to argue further. She knew it wouldn't do any good. Instead, she focused on comforting Emily, whispering softly, "It's okay, sweetheart. Let's go see our friend, okay?" With great effort, she guided the wheelchair away from Karen's driveway and continued down the sidewalk, ignoring the burning sensation of embarrassment and anger on her cheeks. But Karen wasn't done yet. As Sarah and Emily moved farther away, Karen shouted after them, "And don't forget to fix whatever mess you've left behind." Then, with a dramatic flourish, she spun around and marched back into her house, slamming the door shut behind her. The sound echoed through the otherwise serene neighborhood, leaving behind an awkward silence. For Sarah, the incident replayed in her mind long after they reached their neighbor's house. Emily tried to put on a brave face, showing off her drawings, and laughing at jokes during their visit. But Sarah could tell her daughter was still shaken. What bothered Sarah the most wasn't just Karen's rudeness. It was the way she dismissed Emily's needs entirely, treating her like an inconvenience rather than a human being. As they returned home later that evening, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about how Karen's actions had affected not only Emily, but potentially others in the neighborhood. How many times had Karen treated people this way? And why did she feel entitled to act as though her opinions mattered more than anyone else's? These questions swirled in Sarah's mind, fueling a growing determination to address the issue. Not just for her family, but for everyone who might find themselves on the receiving end of Karen's wrath. Little did Karen know, Sarah wasn't just any ordinary mom. Beneath her calm exterior lay years of experience analyzing threats and patterns of behavior, skills honed from working in one of the most critical fields imaginable. If Karen thought she could intimidate Sarah and Emily without consequences, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Karen's reaction to Sarah's presentation at the HOA meeting was swift and predictable. The very next day, she launched a counterattack, determined to discredit Sarah and regain control of the narrative. True to form, Karen began spreading rumors throughout the neighborhood, painting Sarah as an overzealous troublemaker who was only stirring up drama for attention. "She thinks she's so special," Karen told anyone who would listen, her voice dripping with disdain. "Just because she works for some government job doesn't mean she knows better than the rest of us." At first, Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. She had anticipated pushback from Karen, but she hadn't expected such a personal smear campaign. Neighbors who had initially supported her started hesitating, unsure whether they should distance themselves to avoid becoming collateral damage. A few even stopped waving or saying hello when they passed Sarah and Emily on the street. It was frustrating, but Sarah refused to let it shake her confidence. If anything, Karen's behavior only reinforced the need for accountability. What Karen didn't realize was that Sarah thrived under pressure. In her line of work as a threat analyst, she was trained to stay calm in high-stakes situations and think several steps ahead. Now, she applied those same skills to this battle. Instead of retaliating publicly or engaging in petty arguments, Sarah focused on gathering more evidence to strengthen her case. She knew that facts spoke louder than gossip, and she intended to use them strategically. One afternoon, while walking Emily home from school, Sarah noticed Karen standing near the entrance of the subdivision, talking animatedly to another neighbor. Their conversation seemed intense, punctuated by sharp gestures and pointed looks in Sarah's direction. Curious, Sarah slowed her pace slightly, pretending to adjust Emily's wheelchair straps while listening intently. Sure enough, Karen was bad-mouthing her again, accusing her of fabricating stories about the HOA and exaggerating incidents to make herself look like a hero. But instead of feeling hurt or angry, Sarah felt a spark of inspiration. She realized that Karen's aggressive tactics mirrored patterns she'd studied in extremist groups during her career. Individuals who sought to divide communities by sowing distrust and fear. This insight gave her an idea. That evening, she sat down at her laptop and began drafting a detailed report, comparing Karen's divisive behavior to broader examples of hostility and aggression. Drawing on her professional expertise, she highlighted how unchecked bullying could fracture relationships and erode trust within any community. The report was thorough and compelling, filled with real-world analogies and backed by data from credible sources. For example, Sarah explained how individuals like Karen often targeted vulnerable members of a group to assert dominance, creating an atmosphere of intimidation that stifled open communication. She also included specific examples from their own neighborhood, tying Karen's actions directly to the toxic environment she had helped create. By framing the issue in terms of community health rather than personal grievances, Sarah hoped to appeal to higher authorities outside the HOA. Once the report was complete, Sarah decided to share it with key stakeholders beyond the immediate neighborhood. She sent copies to local media outlets, framing her concerns as a matter of public interest rather than private conflict. She reached out to city council members, explaining how Karen's behavior violated principles of inclusivity and fairness outlined in municipal codes governing homeowners associations. She even contacted a regional advocacy group for people with disabilities, asking if they'd be willing to weigh in on behalf of families like hers who faced discrimination in housing communities. The response was overwhelming. Local journalists were intrigued by the story, seeing it as a microcosm of larger societal issues around power dynamics and accessibility rights. Within days, articles began appearing online, shining a spotlight on Karen's conduct and the broader challenges faced by disabled residents in suburban neighborhoods. City officials took notice too, launching an informal inquiry into the HOA's practices and requesting documentation of recent complaints. Even the advocacy group expressed interest, offering legal guidance and resources to support affected families. Meanwhile, Karen's attempts to silence Sarah backfired spectacularly. Her constant accusations and dismissive attitude painted her as increasingly unreasonable, especially when contrasted with Sarah's composed and professional demeanor. Neighbors who had previously wavered in their support started speaking out more openly, sharing their own negative experiences with Karen. Some admitted they'd been too afraid to challenge her before, but now felt empowered to do so. Others expressed gratitude for Sarah's courage in standing up to someone who had long intimidated them. As public pressure mounted, cracks began to form within the HOA board itself. Several members privately approached Sarah, acknowledging that Karen's behavior had gone too far and expressing willingness to support reforms. One board member confided that he'd grown tired of Karen's domineering presence and wanted to see a more collaborative approach to leadership. Another suggested revising certain HOA policies to prioritize inclusivity and accessibility, ensuring that all residents felt welcome regardless of their circumstances. Despite these small victories, Karen remained defiant. At the next HOA meeting, she arrived armed with a stack of papers meant to prove her innocence, including outdated rulebooks and emails she claimed justified her actions. But her theatrics fell flat in the face of mounting evidence against her. When Sarah presented updated findings, complete with testimonials from newly emboldened neighbors and references to external investigations, Karen's defenses crumbled. Her usual bluster gave way to stammering denials, and for the first time she appeared genuinely rattled. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Karen's influence was waning. Board members voted unanimously to review existing guidelines and implement stricter oversight measures to prevent future abuses of power. They also agreed to establish a grievance committee tasked with addressing resident concerns impartially, ensuring no single individual could dominate decision-making processes. While Karen technically retained her position on the board, her authority had been significantly diminished. Outside the meeting room, Sarah received heartfelt thanks from many neighbors who credited her with sparking much-needed change. "We've needed someone like you for years," one woman said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you for not backing down." Another neighbor handed Sarah a card signed by several families, expressing their appreciation for her bravery and dedication. For Sarah, these moments of connection were deeply rewarding. They reminded her why she had taken on this fight, not just for herself and Emily, but for everyone who deserved to live in a safe, supportive environment. Still, she knew there was more work to be done. Change wouldn't happen overnight, and old habits die hard. But with renewed momentum and growing solidarity among her neighbors, Sarah felt hopeful about the future. That night, as she tucked Emily into bed, Sarah reflected on everything they'd accomplished together. "You know..." "What, sweetheart?" she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but if we stand strong and stick together, we can make things better, not just for us, but for everyone." Emily smiled, sleepily, her faith in her mother unwavering. And for Sarah, that was all the motivation she needed to keep moving forward. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's quiet investigation began to take shape. She had always been a meticulous person, a trait that served her well in both her professional life and her current mission. Her notebook was now filled with detailed entries, dates, times, descriptions of incidents, and even snippets of conversations she overheard or participated in. But what truly set Sarah apart was her ability to connect seemingly unrelated events and uncover patterns. It was a skill she honed during her years as a threat analyst, where identifying behavioral trends could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Sarah started noticing unsettling similarities in Karen's actions. For instance, Karen rarely targeted affluent families whose homes were picture-perfect and meticulously maintained. Instead, her wrath seemed reserved for those who appeared vulnerable, people like single parents, elderly residents, or families struggling financially. One neighbor, Mr. Peterson, an elderly man living alone, shared how Karen had berated him for leaving his recycling bin on the curb for an extra day after he'd fallen ill. Another family revealed they'd been fined repeatedly because their young son accidentally kicked a soccer ball into Karen's yard once, and she used it as an excuse to nitpick every minor infraction afterward. These stories weren't just isolated complaints. They painted a disturbing picture of someone who thrived on exploiting others' weaknesses. Sarah realized that Karen wasn't just enforcing HOA rules out of some misguided sense of duty. She was using them as weapons to assert dominance. This realization made Sarah's blood boil, but it also gave her clarity. If she wanted to challenge Karen effectively, she needed more than anecdotes. She needed hard evidence. Determined to gather concrete proof, Sarah expanded her efforts. She attended HOA meetings, which were held monthly in the community center's cramped conference room. At first, she kept a low profile, sitting quietly in the back while Karen dominated the discussions. With her clipboard in hand and a pen tucked behind her ear, Karen would rattle off violations like a prosecutor listing charges in court. "The Johnsons have failed to trim their hedges," she'd announce, pointing at a grainy photo she'd printed from her phone. "And the Garcias left their trash cans visible from the street again. We can't have this kind of sloppiness in our neighborhood." The other board members nodded along, clearly intimidated by Karen's confidence and authority. Most attendees remained silent, avoiding eye contact as if hoping not to draw attention to themselves. But Sarah watched everything closely, the way Karen singled out certain households, The dismissive tone she used when addressing anyone who dared question her decisions, and the smug satisfaction on her face whenever someone caved under her pressure. Sarah took copious notes during these meetings, documenting each accusation and its outcome. Outside of the meetings, Sarah continued reaching out to neighbors, encouraging them to share their experiences. Some were hesitant at first, worried about retaliation or being labeled troublemakers. But Sarah reassured them, explaining that her goal wasn't to create drama, but to ensure everyone felt safe and respected in their own homes. Slowly, people warmed up to her. They appreciated having someone listen without judgment and offer practical advice. A few even offered to help, volunteering to attend future meetings or provide written statements supporting Sarah's cause. 1. Breakthrough came when Sarah spoke with Mrs. Alvarez, a soft-spoken woman who lived 2 streets over. Mrs. Alvarez confided that Karen had once tried to evict her from the neighborhood altogether. The reason? A misunderstanding over a missing mailbox flag. According to Mrs. Alvarez, Karen claimed the missing flag violated HOA guidelines and demanded immediate replacement. When Mrs. Alvarez explained that she couldn't afford a new one right away due to medical bills, Karen escalated the issue, threatening legal action unless the problem was resolved within 48 hours. Terrified, Mrs. Alvarez borrowed money from a relative to buy a new flag, but the incident left her feeling humiliated and powerless. Hearing Mrs. Alvarez's story reinforced Sarah's belief that Karen's behavior wasn't just annoying, it was toxic. It created a culture of fear and division, pitting neighbors against each other instead of fostering a sense of community. Armed with mounting evidence and growing support from her neighbors, Sarah decided it was time to take the next step. She began drafting a formal presentation to present at the upcoming HOA meeting, carefully organizing her findings into clear categories: documented violations, witness testimonies, and proposed solutions. But preparing the presentation wasn't easy. Sarah spent late nights at her kitchen table, poring over her notes and refining her arguments. She knew she had to strike a delicate balance, presenting her case in a way that was factual and persuasive, without coming across as confrontational or vengeful. After all, her goal wasn't to embarrass Karen publicly, but to expose the harm caused by her actions and push for meaningful change. To make her presentation more compelling, Sarah included visual aids. She created charts showing how often specific households were targeted compared to others, highlighting disparities based on income level and household size. She also compiled screenshots of emails Karen had sent to neighbors, many of which contained harsh language and thinly veiled threats. Finally, she drafted a list of recommendations aimed at improving transparency and accountability within the HOA, such as rotating leadership roles and establishing a grievance committee to handle disputes fairly. On the morning of the HOA meeting, Sarah felt a mix of nerves and determination. She dressed professionally, knowing that appearance mattered in situations like this. As she walked into the community center carrying her folder of materials, she noticed several neighbors giving her encouraging smiles. Word had spread about her efforts, and many were eager to see what she had planned. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah stood calmly at the front of the room, making eye contact with each attendee. "Thank you all for allowing me to address the board today," she began, her voice steady and measured. "I want to start by saying that I love living in this neighborhood. It's a beautiful place, and we're fortunate to have such dedicated neighbors. However, I've recently become aware of concerns regarding how certain HOA policies are enforced, and more importantly, how they affect our community." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Over the past few weeks, I've spoken with many of you about your experiences. What I've learned is troubling. Some residents feel unfairly targeted, while others live in fear of making even the smallest mistake. These feelings don't come from nowhere. They stem from consistent patterns of behavior that undermine trust and unity." Sarah then proceeded to share her findings, presenting her charts and documents one by one. The room grew quieter with each revelation, the tension palpable. When she finished, she looked directly at Karen, who sat stiffly at the head of the table, her face flushed with anger. "My hope," Sarah concluded, "is that we can work together to create a fairer, more inclusive environment for everyone. Our neighborhood should be a place where we support one another, not one where we're afraid to step outside our doors. For a moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several neighbors nodded while others exchanged glances that suggested they'd reached their breaking point with Karen's antics. Even some of the board members seemed uneasy, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Karen, however, refused to back down. She launched into a defensive tirade, accusing Sarah of exaggerating the situation and stirring up unnecessary drama. But her usual bravado fell flat in the face of Sarah's calm professionalism. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the tide was turning. Neighbors who had once feared speaking out now felt emboldened to share their own frustrations. And though Karen remained defiant, Sarah knew she had planted the seeds of change. That night, as Sarah tucked Emily into bed, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't expect instant results. Change rarely happened overnight. But she was confident that she had taken the first crucial steps toward creating a better future for her family and her community. The turning point came sooner than anyone expected. After weeks of mounting pressure from neighbors, city officials, and advocacy groups, the HOA board finally took decisive action against Karen. During a special emergency meeting called to address ongoing concerns about leadership and enforcement practices, board members voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position. The decision was announced publicly, citing repeated violations of community standards and a pattern of behavior deemed harmful to neighborhood harmony. While Karen tried to protest, her arguments fell on deaf ears. Even her closest allies on Homeland, the board had turned against her. In her place, Sarah was nominated to serve as a new member of the HOA board, a development that surprised no one. Her calm professionalism, combined with her unwavering commitment to fairness, had earned her widespread respect among residents. When the nomination was put forward, there was an audible murmur of approval in the room. Neighbors exchanged knowing smiles, clearly pleased with the choice. After a brief discussion, Sarah was elected unanimously, stepping into a role she never imagined for herself, but felt uniquely qualified to handle. Her first order of business as a board member was to push for systemic changes within the HOA. Drawing on lessons learned from her career as a threat analyst, Sarah emphasized the importance of transparency, inclusivity, and accountability. She proposed revising outdated policies to better accommodate residents with disabilities, ensuring that sidewalks, parking spaces, and common areas were accessible to everyone. She also advocated for clearer communication channels, urging the board to hold regular town hall meetings where neighbors could voice their concerns without fear of judgment or retaliation. One of Sarah's most significant achievements was spearheading the creation of a neighbor support program. This initiative aimed to foster empathy and understanding by pairing longtime residents with newcomers, particularly those facing unique challenges such as mobility issues or financial hardships. Volunteers would offer practical assistance, helping shovel driveways in winter, mowing lawns during busy seasons, or simply checking in on elderly neighbors who lived alone. The program quickly gained traction, transforming the neighborhood into a more compassionate and interconnected community. Sarah also introduced workshops designed to educate residents about accessibility rights and disability awareness. These sessions featured guest speakers from local advocacy organizations, sharing insights on how small adjustments, like installing ramps or widening pathways, could make a big difference for people like Emily. Many neighbors attended these workshops out of curiosity, but they left inspired, eager to implement changes in their own homes and yards. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to reflect the values Sarah had championed: kindness, cooperation, and mutual respect. Karen, meanwhile, continued to live in the subdivision, though her presence became increasingly irrelevant. Stripped of her authority, she retreated into relative obscurity, rarely seen outside her home except for brief trips to her car. Some speculated that she regretted her actions, while others believed she remained bitter and resentful. Either way, her influence over the community was effectively neutralized. Gone were the days when neighbors tiptoed around her rules or avoided eye contact out of fear. In her absence, a spirit of openness and collaboration flourished. For Sarah and Emily, Life improved dramatically. No longer did they have to worry about being singled out or treated unfairly because of Emily's wheelchair. Instead, they found themselves embraced by a supportive network of friends and neighbors who genuinely cared about their well-being. Walks down the sidewalk became joyful outings rather than tense encounters, with passers-by stopping to chat or compliment Emily's artwork. Even simple gestures like a neighbor holding open a gate or offering a warm smile reminded Sarah of how far they'd come since that fateful afternoon when Karen slammed her door in their faces. Emily, too, thrived in the new environment. Freed from the anxiety of navigating hostile interactions, she blossomed socially, making friends at school and participating in community events tailored to children with disabilities. One particularly memorable moment occurred during the annual block party, where Sarah organized a special art station for kids. Emily proudly displayed her colorful drawings, earning praise from adults and peers alike. Watching her daughter beam with confidence brought tears to Sarah's eyes, not just because of how far Emily had come, but because of the collective effort it represented. It wasn't just Sarah's victory, it was the neighborhood's triumph. As months passed, Sarah reflected on everything they had achieved together. What started as a personal quest for justice had evolved into something much larger, a movement toward unity and empowerment. She often thought about how different things might have been if she hadn't decided to stand up to Karen. Would other families have continued suffering in silence? Would the neighborhood have remained divided, ruled by fear instead of trust? These questions reinforced her belief that speaking out, even when it felt daunting, was always worth it. Looking back, Sarah realized that this experience had changed her in profound ways. Before, she had viewed her professional skills as tools reserved for protecting national security, analyzing threats on a global scale. Now she understood that those same abilities could be applied to everyday challenges, creating positive change, right where it mattered most, at home. By blending her expertise with compassion and determination, she had proven that one person truly could make a difference. On a crisp autumn morning, Sarah stood on her porch sipping coffee, watching as Emily played with a group of children in the cul-de-sac. Leaves crunched underfoot and laughter echoed through the air. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. It likely never would be. But it was undeniably better. People smiled more, helped each other without hesitation, and worked together to solve problems. It was proof that even the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways you couldn't predict. Later that day, as Sarah walked Emily to school, she paused briefly to admire the fresh coat of paint on the community bulletin board. Someone had decorated it with cheerful drawings of flowers and stick figures holding hands, along with a message scrawled in bold letters. "Welcome home." Sarah smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride, not just in herself, but in the community she had helped build. "Mommy," Emily said, tugging gently at her sleeve. "Can we stop by the park after school today?" "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. As they resumed their walk hand in hand, Sarah knew they were exactly where they belonged, in a place where love, resilience, and justice had created a brighter future for everyone.